Hello, friends. Welcome to the Nexus podcast. I'm your host, James Dice. Each week, I fire questions at the leaders of the smart buildings industry to try to figure out where we're headed and how we can get there faster without all the marketing fluff. I'm pushing my learning to the limit, and I'm so glad to have you here following along. Before we get started, here's a quick note from our sponsor. Our first sponsor on the show had to be Montgomery Technologies. Their COO, Joe Gaspardoni, is easily the number one fan of the show. No offense, of course, to any of you other hardcore listeners out there, but Joe listens to every episode, sometimes more than once, and then he gives me his feedback via email, good, bad, or otherwise. Joe is a podcast host, and I think he's maybe a much better interviewer. Joe and his team would like to remind all of you of the importance of the network layer in the smart building stack. Technology installed in buildings places a heavy burden on commercial real estate operations teams. Cybersecurity, change management, road access, data integrity across all the different siloed systems in the building presents a significant challenge. Just knowing where everything is, how it is connected, where it is connected can be too much for thinly staffed corporate IT departments. Their primary function is to oversee the corporate network, not all of these systems in the network. So learn how a converged network fills this gap by clicking the link in the show notes. It shows how a converged network solves for all of the above and is the first step to enabling a smarter building. This episode is a conversation with Aaron Block, founder and CEO of Allumia. We talked about creating simplicity in the commercial buildings market and how that can unlock decarbonization. A huge part of that is the role of electric utilities as a vital driver of adoption. So we talked about how their role needs to evolve. And finally, we talked about how Allumia's software platform connects the end customer, that utility, and the supply chain of implementers to get decarbonization done. And a quick announcement before we start. If you like this conversation, you want to check out our white paper called Untapped 87%. It's at www.nexuslabs.online/whitepapers. So without further ado, please enjoy the Nexus podcast with Aaron Block. Hello, Aaron. Welcome to the show. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me on. I'm Aaron Block, CEO and founder of Allumia. And I'm really excited to be on and talk about energy efficiency as a service, and how we put that to work to combat climate change.
There you go. Let's start not there. Let's start with your background. Can you talk about what you did before Allumia, and then maybe go all the way back? What's your background?
Sure. I mean, I think my background's a lot less interesting than energy efficiency as a service, which maybe isn't saying, like, can we start this over? I don't want to badmouth myself or energy efficiency as a service. But yeah, happy to roll back the clock and talk a little bit about my background and how I got to where I am and how Allumia got to where it is. Yeah, and I think it really, it all started for me back in college when I accidentally enrolled myself in an economics class instead of an English class. And discovered that I really liked the principles of economics. I really liked that way of thinking about the world, and sort of how do you deal with optimization of the distribution of scarce resources, and sort of how you put those pieces together. But I was at the time a very long-haired hippie, and I sort of set out to figure out how to harmonize a lot of my personal philosophy with what I felt was sort of like giving into demand, studying economics, and where I settled was energy economics, and sort of how do you go about using the principles of economics to drive a sustainable future from an energy standpoint, renewables efficiency and the like. And so right after college, I joined a smart grid startup out in DC, a very well-funded smart grid startup where I joined the strategy team. And I think, it probably should be a red flag to any recent grad out there. If a startup is hiring a 20-year-old to write their corporate strategy, there might be something slightly amiss there. But of course, I had all of the hubris of a 20-year-old, and so I didn't pick up on that. I spent about nine months at that company. And then the startup or the strategy team from that company spun out, and we co-founded together our first company, which is called Skyline Innovations, which is focused on doing solar water heating as a service, solar hot water as a service in the early days of sort of solar finance 1.0, back when financing commercial solar was cool the first time around. And we grew that up into being the largest developer of commercial solar water heating in the country, which if you pick a small enough pond, you can be the
Be the
biggest
biggest.
fish. And that pond, the pond that is solar hot water, is basically a puddle. So we picked a small pond. We got to be the biggest fish. And then that company started to evolve in the direction of energy brokerage and retail energy, which is a very cool, very interesting space, but not one that I was particularly interested in pursuing. I was interested in continuing to develop the as a service model and figuring out how do you make it simpler and easier for small businesses in particular to opt into sustainability. What are the roadblocks that you can take out of the way with a service model? So as that company evolved into the retail brokerage space, I spun out and founded Allumia, really focused on delivering energy efficiency as a service. So moved out of the generation space, moved out of the hot water space into energy efficiency, really focused on providing energy efficiency, energy efficient lighting in particular to small businesses. And we worked on that, started as a one-person company, focused on buildings that I could ride my bike to from downtown Seattle, knocking on doors and saying, hey, we believe that you would save a ton of money upgrading to LED lighting. We know that your time and your money is best spent doing whatever it is you do for business, if that's selling groceries or flipping hamburgers or making airplane parts. So we'll design the system for you. We'll upgrade, we'll manage the upgrade, the contractor doing the installation. We'll provide a revenue grade meter that measures how much energy you're saving and when, and we'll bill you for just a portion of the savings. So the idea was sort of take the ESCO model and simplify it down to a place where small businesses could opt into it. Because there's the ESCO model, again, is great, but it does have a couple of problems. One is that in order to really understand what you're buying into, you need to have a dedicated energy manager. You need to have somebody who can understand a fairly complex IP/MVP model that may span across several spreadsheets, several workbooks, and introduces things like thermodynamic modeling of a building. The owner of 5 Burger Kings or an independent manufacturer of corrugated cardboard products is not going to be able to understand that. And so what we really looked to solve was, okay, how do we simplify that down to the level where that, small regional business owner, that mom and pop shop can understand it. And we really found that the metering was the key there, sort of giving them this auditable piece of technology that they could look at and understand the savings. It also meant that we could really streamline the sales process and the delivery process. We don't have a really elaborate contract that gets negotiated every time. We have a very stock contract. And so that made it profitable for us to actually manage those contracts and to be able to build projects that were $20, $30, $50,000 in size, whereas your standard ESCO contract is very often $5 million and up. There's so much bespoke development there, not just in the design of the system, but the negotiation of the contract, the development of the IP/MVP model, that they really can't afford to serve that small and mid-sized, or what I call the mass market commercial industrial customer. It isn't cost effective for them to go after that marketplace, and so it just wasn't being served. That model was fairly effective for us. We got our feet into about 15 states, sort of doing direct sales, going out to these customers and offering them energy efficiency upgrades. And we really realized, we learned that if you're going to build $50,000, $100,000 projects in Seattle and Cincinnati and Savannah, Georgia, you want all of those projects to look the same, feel the same, cash flow the same, have the same risk and return profile, the same maintenance characteristics, all of the same documentation. You need to do that without ever putting your own feet on site, because there isn't enough margin in a $50,000 deal to fly somebody from Seattle to Savannah, Georgia. So we built a bunch of technology to sort of automate and standardize that process. So we knew that all of our projects were being built to the same standards, through the same processes, with the same documentation. And that really let us sort of accelerate our growth and build a portfolio of projects that were maintainable for a long time, as well as being cost effective to build up front. And that is, in 2018, 2019, when Duke Energy reached out to us and said, hey, we see what you're doing with this efficiency as a service thing. We want to do it too. Let's figure out how we work together. And initially we set out to sort of, co-brand a product, go out to the market with Duke and Allumia's efficiency as a service offering, and very quickly realized that Duke's brand equity, their access to customers, their presence in the market was better than ours was ever going to be. Right? They've been in business for 100 years. They're their customers' trusted energy expert, trusted energy advisor. They can gain access to customers in a way, with a level of trust at a speed that Allumia just never could. But what they lacked was the ability to sort of turn that customer relationship into an ongoing revenue generating relationship beyond just selling them kilowatt hours. And so what we started to do was provide our platform, our software, our IoT, and our services support to them, so that they could provide their own efficiency as a service offering to the market. And now Duke has a program called Direct Efficiency. It's Duke's efficiency as a service offering. Allumia is really, really driving that forward. And that was really the genesis of the change for Allumia. And since then, we've evolved from providing direct efficiency as a service to the market to providing the tools to other entities who want to utilize their brand, want to utilize their position in the market as either a trusted energy expert or a trusted facilities expert or a cost savings expert. They've got a large customer base. They want to leverage that, and we can put the tools in their hands to put an efficiency as a service or decarbonization as a service offering into their customer facilities.
Got it. So the evolution from one dude on a bike trying to save the world to helping utilities to helping everybody that wants to sort of do energy efficiency at scale.
Yeah, and yeah, it's a long and slow evolution, but I think our goal now is to be helping people who are in that position to help a large number of people, to give them the tools to do that, to invest in decarbonizing their communities, to put resources behind decarbonizing their communities. And very often that is the utility, who's a trusted energy expert, who can walk in the door, at a national scale, national account client, or at that mom and pop regional corrugated cardboard manufacturer, and say, you're really good at pumping out branded cardboard boxes day after day after day. I know everything there is to know about energy, be it generation, transmission, distribution, and frankly, I probably know more than you do about the energy efficient ways to consume energy. So let me design the system for you. Let me take this problem off of your plate, and you just focus on doing what you do best, which is running your business. And that's really a value that I think that utilities can be providing. Similarly, I think REITs and property managers are in a similar position to provide value to their portfolio of buildings, rather than sort of putting that on the building owner or the tenants to figure out what the right energy efficient equipment is. Those are really trusted facilities experts, and let's just give them the tools to provide a ideally capex free way to install sustainable upgrades in those facilities.
Totally.
Eliminate the barriers to making those upgrades happen.
So I want to unpack all of this, but I want to go back I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a follow-up question on the solar thermal, solar hot water thing, because that was a phase of clean tech that has seemed to have passed. Am I right about that? How do people view solar thermal, solar hot water today?
Uh, I think that as much as I like it, solar hot water was never cool. It was, and that's why we sort of found a niche in it, right? It was because solar PV is so much more interesting, so much more magical. There wasn't a lot of people paying attention to solar hot water, and you can't. There's no very few district energy projects in the US, so you can't sell heated water back to the grid, right? You have to store it all on site. So the number of applications is much more niche. I don't know that I'd say that it is dead or that it's past, but it remains niche, and I think will remain niche forever. And I think as heat pump technology continues to improve, as PV technology continues to improve, more and more it will make sense to use heat pumps to heat
Mhm.
water and power those heat pumps through PV. But solar hot water technology is so dead simple and such a no-brainer for the places that it is applicable that it is a shame that it isn't getting deployed more.
Yeah. Actually, I don't think I've said this in the podcast before. My senior project, so I was a mechanical engineering student. My senior project was to build a solar hot water, solar thermal pasteurizer for low income applications,
Oh, that's
um,
awesome.
developing country applications. We were able to, I can't remember exactly how hot we were able to get the water, but something like 165 degrees Fahrenheit, I think.
Sounds about right. I mean,
You
you can
gotta
get it.
yeah, you got to keep. We built it all with just like spare parts as well. So that was the whole concept. Find a broken window on the side of the road and build it with some 2x4s.
Well, and that's just it, right? I mean, the technology is there's you don't have to electron dope a silicon wafer. You can put a broken window
Yeah,
over some black piping and you're 60% of the way there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And we used a thermostatic valve to open the water when it was hot enough, and it was a radiator valve from a car, so you just be able to reuse that as well. As long as there were cars and windows, we were able to
To make it work.
make it work. Yeah. So I was a big believer at that point in time. That was a fun project. So okay, so let's get into the meat of. Let's dive into kind of what you said earlier as this intro to Illumia. You and I first met when I was writing this white paper on how come we don't have more building technologies in smaller buildings, right? And that includes energy. I include the energy efficiency in that. Like, why don't we have energy efficient technologies? Why don't we have controls? Why don't we have all types of smart building technologies? Is kind of how I was looking at that problem. And you came in and really helped me kind of frame the entire white paper around this discussion of complexity and simplicity, right? So, can you just talk about kind of why you see simplicity or removing complexity as the sort of number one way to unlock? It's really the number one way to unlock a lot of things, but really what you're focused on is decarbonization. So, can you tell me how you
Yeah.
think about that?
Yeah, I do see complexity as the number one hurdle to realizing decarbonization in the commercial and industrial space, and particularly in sort of the mass market commercial and industrial space that Illumia deals with. I think, as you go up market into state university systems, the federal government, hospitals, and the like, what is sort of colloquially called the much market, there's enough expertise on hand to really take on those building technologies and decarbonization in general. There's people who can sort of be dedicated to understanding it. There are mechanical and electrical engineers on staff. And when you get a little bit down market from there into the mass market that Illumia deals with, there's just too many other things going on relative to the deal value,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you run a small business, you don't have a dedicated energy manager, and you have to spend your time focused on what generates revenue for the business, right? You have to be really focused on the top line. And so small business owners, small building owners, they don't have the time to understand what the decarbonization options are that are available to them, to what the financing options are available to them. Quite frankly, how to evaluate the quality of potential installation partners that are available to them. And so people, I think, look at Allumia a lot as a finance company, as a project finance entity. And they look at efficiency as a service as a way to eliminate the capital expenditure of doing an energy efficiency upgrade or doing a decarbonization upgrade. But really what Allumia is and what energy efficiency as a service is, or efficiency as a service is a method of simplifying the problem. And yes, finance is the most visible of those complexities. How are you going to pay for this upgrade? But it actually is the entire wraparound suite of services. That is, we're going to come into your facility and we're going to identify what the upgrades are. And we're going to find the appropriate contractor to do the installation. We're going to manage them to make sure that that installation is done in the way that it should be done at scale. We're going to meter this installation to make sure that it is performing for the life of the system in the way that it should. We'll provide the maintenance to keep it up. And you as a business owner don't have to worry that we're going to do what we say that we're going to do, because we're only going to bill you out of a portion of the value that you receive, right? And so it really is, in a lot of ways, shifting all of those burdens of expertise onto the entity who is claiming to be the expert, right? You, as a regional Burger King owner, don't need to know anything about LED lights or HVAC systems or walk-in refrigeration. We'll take care of all of that for you. And you focus on doing what is your highest and best value, which is selling Whoppers.
Totally.
And I think that that's a really powerful motivator for small businesses. And I think when you look at it, who is best suited to provide that simplicity? Who is the trusted arbiter of energy expertise? Very often it is the utility. Even when you aren't going through an as-a-service model, the first person that a lot of these business owners think of when they think about doing a decarbonization upgrade, when they think about doing an efficiency upgrade, is their utility. And they'll call up the utility and say, hey, I want to do an LED lighting upgrade. My HVAC system is getting ready to fail. I need a replacement. What should I do? And right now, the de facto utility response is, here is our list of trade allies. Call one of them. And when you decide on what you're going to do, you can apply to us for a rebate. And that's a huge stumbling block for the mass market commercial industrial customer. They just don't have the time and the wherewithal to manage that sort of thing at scale. And so they follow the path of least resistance, which very often is not the path of decarbonization. It's the path of status quo. And so a lot of opportunity for energy efficiency, a lot of opportunity for decarbonization just gets left on the table. The trade allies aren't getting all the work that they could get. The utilities aren't recognizing the savings that they could recognize. And the customer is spending more than they have to.
Totally.
The environment suffers as a result.
Yeah.
And so we think it makes sense for the utility to push out a simplified model to those customers through an as-a-service model, and go knock on Burger King's door and say, look, I'm your trusted energy expert. Let me solve this problem for you. Let me design the system. Let me make sure that it gets installed by quality installers who are doing work in the right way. Let me bill you over time for a portion of the savings that you receive. And since the utility is the one going out and and sort of pushing this into the market, they can do it in a much more inclusive way. When you think back to sort of the conventional way of trying to drive efficiency programs that I just talked about, where the utility waits for somebody to call up and say, hey, I want to do this. And the utility says, okay, well, I'll cut you a rebate. First of all, you are relying then on the non-expert to make all the decisions, right? The business owner to make the right set of decarbonization decisions. But you're also providing rebates only to the most privileged among the ratepayers, right? In order to take on an energy efficiency upgrade, you have to have the bandwidth to evaluate the options, to negotiate with the contractors, to select the equipment, and then to pay a premium. And yes, the utility may give you a rebate. That rebate may range from 30 to 50% of the cost of your upgrade, but you still have to be ready to cough up 70 to 50% upfront in cash. And so the folks who are not as well off, whose businesses aren't doing as well, they're still paying into that energy efficiency fund. They're still paying that rider that lets the utility fund energy efficiency rebates, but they never get the benefit from it, right? Because they don't have the time, the bandwidth, the cash to manage that process. If the utility can go out to all of their customers and say, look, I know the right answer for you, the customer, based on the trusted energy expert, I also know the right answer for the grid as a whole, right? I know where we're going to see constraints in the future on our transmission line. I know where we need to alleviate load. The utility can start making a holistic benefit that, yes, benefits that end customer and all of its end customers ideally equally, but also benefits the grid in a concerted, measured way. And so I think that putting efficiency as a service, decarbonization as a service in the hands of utilities and letting them sort of provide a curated solution to the marketplace is really, really valuable, both from an inclusivity standpoint, making decarbonization available to everyone, and from a net benefit standpoint, because you can drive a lot more sustainability if you are pushing these solutions into the market than you can if you're waiting for the market to come to you and ask for them. And the last thing that I'll sort of say about this for now is I also think that it is good for the trade ally ecosystem, for the contractor ecosystem, the folks who are doing those installs, because first of all, more jobs are generated. If the utility is out selling this into the marketplace alongside or on behalf of those trade allies, they're going to be able to generate more deal flow, and so those trade allies can get more work done. You also then have an objective arbiter of what is good and bad work quality and workmanship and product. And the most damaging thing to good contractors is bad contractors, right? In any trust-based economy, you really the biggest damage to good actors is bad actors. And not having a transparent marketplace where that end customer is unsure of the value that they're going to get and is asked to pay up front regardless of what value they get. And that's, again, one of those complexities that prevents the mass market commercial industrial customer from engaging in decarbonization. They don't know upfront how to tell the quality of the solution that they're going to get. They don't know how to tell high quality LED lights or high quality variable frequency drives from low quality ones. They don't know how to tell a really good lighting contractor from a pretty good lighting contractor. And the utility is in a great place to be the clearinghouse for that information.
Absolutely. I want to circle back real quick on the mass market versus what people in the smart buildings industry typically think of as the buildings industry. So when we like have, when we talk about Class A offices, or we've had Stanford and Duke and like those types of building owners, and you mentioned Bush Market, so there's universities as part of that, but also Class A office buildings, these bigger buildings that have more money and more resources, like you talked about. What we're talking about is like the 98% of the other commercial buildings, right? And
Very much
what
so, yeah.
what I found when I did my paper is that was something approaching 50% of the energy use in the United States. So this is a big problem, right? And simplicity is, I agree with you, like you know, should be like the keystone to making all of this happen. So um, the types of complexity that you mentioned, so that you mentioned financial complexity, right? I don't have the money to spend on this, right? But then if I'm going to borrow money, all of that complexity to figuring out how to do that and who to do it
Yep.
with and who to trust, what the terms should be and all of that. Um, you mentioned last time we talked about this 3 other types of complexity. I'm wondering if you could just walk people through those. There was programmatic, installation, and then value or performance risk complexity. Could you just walk people through that? I think you already talked about all of them, but just I want to spell it out clearly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think programmatic complexity is getting back to that utility rebate space where there are a lot of incentives out there for people to engage in decarbonization activities. There's a lot of opportunity either for tax credits or for cash rebate, or maybe you get some free consulting, out of your utility. And that is a complex thing to navigate to the point where, Allumia has Fortune 100 companies that have asked us to manage their rebate filing. They're out there doing a bunch of energy efficiency upgrades. They're doing them without the rebates because they don't have the time or the energy or the expertise to take that on.
So just
And
leaving
that's,
money on the table because they're just like, I don't know how this works and this takes too long to figure out and all that.
yeah, and it's just managing paperwork and it's navigating a bureaucracy. And if you are a Fortune 100 company with a very publicly stated sustainability goal and money to spend, you can leave that on the table and not feel bad about it. If you are a mass market customer, if you are not, the Class A office buildings, if you're not the universities, if you're not the multinational corporations, you probably don't have the money to do it if you don't get some amount of rebates. And even if you do have the money to do it, it can just lead to analysis paralysis where that there's something out there, there's a better way to do this. And if you can't figure it out, you're just not going to do anything.
Totally.
Right. And so it just keeps getting pushed lower and lower on the stack of papers on your desk. This is something I'll get to eventually. Similarly, that happens in the financial complexity. One of the things that we see a lot when people look at funding, using debt to fund an energy efficiency upgrade, they always think they're going to be able to find a better cost of capital, a lower debt rate. And maybe they can, but that takes time. You have to call bankers, you have to negotiate terms. And it's just not something that's going to float to the top of your list of priorities. And so it just doesn't get done. So having a really simplified, streamlined way of navigating those programs is really important to getting mass market buy-in. And so, what Allumia does when we're providing either direct to customer efficiency as a service, or we're doing a utility program that is independent of existing rebate programs, is we manage all of that process for the end customer so that they don't have to touch any of it. We disclose to them, we show them what those rebate dollars are. We use it to buy down the cost of capital for providing their project, but we handle all of the paperwork. We navigate that, and that paperwork doesn't need to be as esoteric as it is. I think, there's a lot of regulatory work around it that probably does, in fact, require some degree of esotericism. But it's just sort of how do you make it easy to opt in? Then the next one was installation complexity, which again, we sort of talked about separating a good proposal from a bad proposal, evaluating the quality of your installation partners, knowing whether or not you're getting a good quote, that quote is reflective of the value that you'll be receiving. One of the things that we see when customers bring us projects that they've already started to evaluate on is very often we see quotes, for example, that have in Seattle, we'll see quotes that have an assumed kilowatt hour rate of 20 cents. Now the average price for energy in the city of Seattle is 7.5 to 9 cents, much lower than 20 cents. But that's not something that an end customer is going to pick up on very quickly. It's not something that they're looking for. They aren't, energy experts. And it's not necessarily the result of bad action on behalf of the contractor who's producing that proposal. They're just churning out a bunch of proposals very quickly. And so, that leads to customers eventually feeling like they got misled, which, then permeates the rest of the market, which then makes people hesitant to sort of unpack that. Or, you're going to have somebody coming into your facility changing out all of the lights, and they're going to do it overnight. And how do you know that that work is going to be done to a quality standard? Or they're going to be switching out the HVAC on your roof, which is, a vital piece of, keeping your tenants happy, is that they feel comfortable in their space. And these are just things that sooner or later you have to do if you're a building owner or a building operator, but it isn't sort of your core competency, isn't what you want to be spending your time doing, isn't the highest and best use of your time. And so if you can find a way to sort of take that off of the building owner's hands, makes it much easier for them to engage in it, right? And again, sort of being able to come in and say, look, I'm the expert in facilities management, or I'm the expert in energy and energy consumption and sustainability. And so I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to get paid out of the benefit that this generates for you. That, again, eliminates that big stumbling block. You aren't asking the customer to take a bet on you with their money. You're saying, I'm going to make a bet on myself with my own money.
Yeah. And that's where the performance complexity comes in, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they all sort of dovetail together pretty tightly. But yeah, and, how does a customer know, looking at a project, whether, this LED light is as good as that LED light? Is a 10-year warranty worth more than a 5-year warranty? On paper, yes, but if the manufacturer has been in business for 3 years, as many LED lighting manufacturers have been, it's probably not worth anymore. Or, this HVAC proposal says that I'm going to save 70% of my total energy consumption. This HVAC proposal says I'm going to save 30%. And which one of those is accurate? Which one of those is right? How do I know who to trust? And if something goes wrong, if a light goes out in 3 months or 3 years, who do I call? How do I get it taken care of? Right? Am I now responsible for it? If my even if I have a great contractor, my time or my parts and labor warranty is 1 year. What happens if a motor fails on my roof in 3 years? And it's a motor that's 3 times as expensive as the stock off the shelf motor, because it's a electronically commutated motor. So again, being able to say, hey, we're the experts in this technology. We trust in this solution. We're deploying it at scale across this service territory, and we're going to take care of that for you.
Yeah.
Not just during the installation, not just up front, but for the next 7 to 10 years. And if it fails, we'll replace it for you. If it doesn't generate the savings that we told you it's going to generate, we won't bill you for savings that it didn't generate.
Let's pause here for one more quick word from our sponsor, and then we'll get back to the show. And now, a quick note from our sponsor, Invaried Systems. We've discussed this a few times on this show in the past, Improving indoor air quality with optimized ventilation and air cleaning doesn't need to conflict with building decarbonization and climate resiliency goals. To show you why that's true, Inverid Systems and a group of other IAQ and energy experts put together a new white paper called How to Achieve Sustainable Indoor Air Quality. Check the link in the show notes to learn how a 4-step clean first approach can be used to design and operate low energy but high IAQ climate resilient buildings of the future. Also, unrelated to the sponsorship, Inverid's CEO Christian Weeks and other guests from the white paper will be on the show this month too, so check that out for a deeper dive into the insights of the paper. I'd love to, so you've talked about energy efficiency as a service or efficiency as a service. I'd love to kind of strictly or specifically talk about how that differs from the ESCO model real quick. And to me, the way that you just described the performance risk piece and the installation complexity piece is one of the big differences for me, which is in the ESCO model, it's really like a contractual guarantee. It's not, I mean, I've been a part of a lot of performance contracts before, and I've actually sat on the M&V team of one of the biggest ESCOs out there. And what I found was that when I dug into, I was doing annual M&V reports, right, for these big universities that have done these tens of $1 million huge performance contracts. And what I found when I dug into them is that it's a contractual guarantee, and that's just my term. I don't know if I made that up or what, but like what I found is when I read the contract, there's no way anyone could prove to me that I was wrong or that the ESCO was wrong, right? There's no way you could say that the ESCO is owing anything. So it's basically not a guarantee at all. It's just a contract that makes it look like there's a guarantee. Versus, and really it's basically saying, hey, we're going to do this math after the fact, and we get to adjust that math and how that math is done however we want, pretty much after the fact. I'm going to get a lot of angry emails from ESCOs out there, but this is how it was for me, right? I could create this energy model and I could adjust it basically however I wanted it after the fact. And then the math is going to get done, and I'm going to show you that you had energy savings, whether they were there or not, right? With energy as a service or efficiency as a service, what you're basically saying is that we're going to calculate the savings and then we're going to split that with you. Can you talk about how those two methods are different? And what other, I guess, what other ways is efficiency as a service different than the ESCO model?
Yeah, I mean, I think you put a pretty good description on it, and there's definitely been my experience with the ESCO model and with a number of current and former, ESCO employees that I've talked with and worked with in the past. Your description of the M&V team resonates true, but I don't say that necessarily as a knock on the ESCO world, because again, this comes back to the customer's level of expertise and their ability to buy in. Very often, when you are an ESCO customer, you have a dedicated energy manager, somebody who's able to come in and sort of engage the ESCO tete-a-tete, sort of at their level, um, and really know and understand and evaluate what they're getting and the quality of what they're getting. And at that point, the performance guarantee is almost more of a CYA
Mm-hmm.
from an institutional standpoint than it is about that the ESCO is going to pay you back. The ESCO never pays you back. The house always wins, but that's not the point for the ESCO customer at the end of the day, because they have the expertise to really evaluate that and understand what they're getting. Another piece there is in that M&V that, yeah, the way that the ESCO model looks at M&V is they build, again, a very complex thermodynamic IPMVP model, and they evaluate that and data points on an annual, or if it's a rapidly turning model, a quarterly basis, to evaluate what those savings are. And there's a bunch of inputs that you can adjust up and down, and so it's very hard to get an ESCO model to pay out. And sort of the way that I often describe the ESCO model to folks is ESCOs tend to be design build contractors, right? And so I'm going to sell you a facilities upgrade, and I'm going to build that. I'm going to install it. You're going to pay me cash for it. Now, you may go take out debt from a bank to pay cash, or you may pay cash out of your own pocket. If you take debt out from a bank, you're going to pay that on a monthly basis. You're going to pay down your balance. And if you don't see savings, you're going to come back, and we have an agreement that you can claw it back out of my balance sheet.
Mm-hmm.
That I will pay you back. The efficiency as a service model says, no, I, the service provider, am the trusted energy expert. I'm going to measure your savings in real time, every minute or every 5 minutes. And at the end of every month, I'm going to add up all of those savings calculations. And I'm going to tell you how much I saved you. And you can audit those numbers. You can look at those numbers, but we're going to split whatever I can prove that I saved you. So first difference there is, the ESCO says you're going to save at least $10,000 a year. And I guarantee that. And if you can prove that you didn't save $10,000, I'll pay you the difference. And the as a service model says, I'm not going to guarantee that I'm going to save you $1, but I will only get paid, say, 50 cents of every dollar that I can prove that I do save you. And it is on me to prove that I saved it rather than on you to prove that you didn't save it. So that's one big distinction. The other, again, is sort of that metering interval and sort of where that reporting takes place. And then the third big distinction there is, to make that M&V granularity possible, the as a service model, at least as Allumia has instantiated it, is really more focused on individual measures, right? The ESCO model really makes sense if you're doing a whole campus with a diverse set of measures. You're doing not just lighting, HVAC, refrigeration, building management systems, but you might be doing window replacements or insulation or reducting, things that aren't capable of being isolated, aren't necessarily capable of being metered, that have a huge cost and a long payback, but do have a ton of value. That's really where sort of the ESCO model, I think, really shines. And it also helps them get to their threshold of, the $5 million that they need to deploy to make it worth their time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think the as a service model works best if you are isolating specific measures or a subset of measures. And in Allumia's case, we really try to target active measures. So things that can be actively metered rather than passively modeled.
Got it. Yeah, and the way that I understand the as a service model as well is that I think you mentioned earlier, it started as it's mostly focused on lighting, right? Switching to LEDs. One of the things I wanted to ask you about that was, as we look at what each building needs to do to decarbonize, this roadmap to net zero that needs to happen for every building, there are going to be some of those bigger, more comprehensive, more holistic measures that need to happen, right? So can the as a service model be applied to those types of projects or roadmaps like you just talked about?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. And there are complexities to solve about any given measure. And, it always, to me, comes back to complexity and how do you simplify. I think, right now, about 50% of our projects these days by value are lighting, and the remainder are HVAC and refrigeration. So we've done a pretty good job of diversifying, and I think you'll see, other as a service folks out there diversifying beyond just lighting as well. It is an easy place to start because it is an easy thing to meter,
Mm-hmm.
and the paybacks are pretty good. I think as you get into things that are not active measures, things that are passive measures, you do have to deviate a bit from the metered solution. And that does introduce new complexities. It does introduce more of a degree of trust into the equation, because you have to sort of say, hey, we're going to model out what your building looks like with one type of insulation and with another type of insulation. So I do think that it's doable. And I think that, again, that's where having a really trusted advisor in place, be it utility or a REIT, can make that quite a bit simpler. But when you get to those types of transactions, you're also looking at a much larger time scale.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the payback on refenestrating a building, changing out all its windows, is 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
It's a pretty substantial infrastructure improvement. And so I think you could apply the as a service model, but that's where you start to dovetail, I think, into other more traditional financing models making more sense.
Okay.
Right? That's something that you might refinance a property and use, either a standard refinancing or use PACE, property assessed clean energy funds,
Okay.
to make an upgrade like that.
Got it. What
I think
about
there's
with? Go ahead.
I think there's an interesting bit of a hybrid model out there. I'm sure you've talked about in your podcast before, the MEETS model, metered energy efficiency transaction structure. And that, really is, because of the way that it brings in more parties into the transaction and is sort of an upmarket class A office building type of a solution. It can take a longer view. It is less based on even though it's called the metered energy efficiency transaction structure, it does a lot of things that are modeled. I think that can come in and sort of be a counterpoint to PACE, an additional option. I think for the type of market that Allumia looks to serve, to the mass market, that solution is still too complex. There are too many hands in the pie, too many people involved in the transaction for it to really make sense for, again, your regional corrugated cardboard manufacturer.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the things that's really wonderful about the market for decarbonization is, no matter who you are, at what stage you are, there is a good solution out there. We just have to, really clarify the messaging around each of them.
Totally. What about for fuel switching? And when I say what about, I mean, like, which of these options is best for fuel switching? So like right now, I'm in that decision fatigue stage on my hot water heater at my house. And it is like basically cash flow neutral in that I will see no savings on my utility bill from the switch to a heat pump. But I still want to do it. And so one of the things I'm like basically stuck with is what model to use. I'm basically serving as the ESCO, right? In that I'm hand holding all of these contractors through this process that they've somehow never heard of before. But and that's why I'm just tired of the process and just took a break from it at this point. But if you think about all the small commercial buildings in the mass market, how many of them need to maybe there won't be a payback to electrification? Where do these different models come in and help there?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And we've started with some of our utility partners to get questions about, how do you drive fuel switching or electrification? I think fuel switching is sometimes a dirty word.
Yes, it is.
Or dirty phrase. And I do think, right, if there's not a payback, how do you give the customer some sort of incentive to make that change? Right? Why are you going to put down more money up front if it's not going to pay itself off? And it's not, I think, that things like heat pumps don't have a payback. It's just that it's a long timeline to that payback, right? It is, a 15, 20-year time horizon. And I guess what I would say is when you look at that, who benefits from a bunch of customers switching from fuel oil or natural gas to electricity consumption? Who has an appetite for assets that are 15, 20 plus years lifespan? Who's in a good place to evaluate the efficacy of those changes? The answer to all three of those questions for me is the utility. Right? And I think it makes sense for the utilities to be getting in a position of saying, hey, this is something that is good for you as the end customer in the long run. It's good for you as the end customer in the short run, because we aren't going to be burning natural gas inside your living quarters or working quarters. It's good for the environment because we can decarbonize electricity more easily than we can decarbonize your water heater or your natural gas-fired water heater. Let us solve that problem for you, and let us provide it to you, again, on a service basis, right? We're gonna bill you for your usage of this asset, just as we bill you for your usage of the rest of the grid assets on a consumption basis. I think that makes a ton of sense. And so, again, then it comes down to a question of complexity and simplicity. And how do you make it simple for the utility to do that? How do you make it simple for the utility to identify the appropriate customers, to interface with those customers, to manage the installations, a bunch of small installations? Utilities are set up to build $1 or $2 billion assets a decade, not $1,000, $50,000 assets a year. So how do you make it easy for them to manage that? How do you make it easy for them to bill for that? How do you make it easy for them to maintain that? And that's really, the technology I think that Allumia has tried to develop is the platform, the software, the IoT, the services platform that makes it easy to deploy those types of assets at scale. It's not just about simplifying for the end customer, it's about simplifying for the provider, for the utility.
Totally. That's a great segue to my last question, which is, can you talk about all of the things that you're building from a technology standpoint to make this whole process simple? And to me, it's like a marketplace of providers, but also kind of like automating the process to work with the providers, right? That's got to be a huge piece of it. There's got to be a huge piece of it around what are all the, like, standardizing all of the energy conservation measures. What are all the devices and products I could put into this? And then really just like process automation, right? The step to install this device, the steps to install this device are 1 through 20. And we're going to just define all of that out and process automate all of that. Is that kind of what you guys are building as a technology startup in this space?
Yeah, I think you've touched on most, if not all, of the pieces. And I think, the quote that always comes to mind when I think about what Allumia is building is Dolly Parton. Costs a lot of money to look this cheap. There's a lot of complexity that goes into building a technology that simplifies things for people. And so for us on the software front, it is all about sort of workflow and process automation. So first, how do you simplify the segmentation of and identification of customers, right? How do you make it easy to look across a whole bunch of utility bills or across a geographic space and say, here's where our targets are? And then once we go and identify the targets, how do you make it very, very simple and easy to acquire the data needed to generate a set of energy conservation measures, ECMs? So what we've done is tried to boil buildings down to what we call sort of a minimum sufficient data set. What is the smallest amount of information that we need to capture that doesn't require an expert to be on site to capture that data? put that into our system, and then generate a set of recommendations, a set of recommended energy conservation measures, proposals to go with those recommendations, contracts, all branded for our partner, so we can put that in their hands. They can take it and go get the customer to sign off on the deal. And then once we have customers sign off on the deal, we actually send that same information out to our installation partners, our trade allies. And I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that we build a marketplace for those trade allies. We try to work within the utility's sort of pre-approved set of trade allies, because what we want to be doing is creating opportunities, creating jobs for those utility constituents within that service territory. So we aren't trying to bring in a bunch of really large national contractors to knock this work out. We want to be sending work out to the local contractors who are on the ground, who know the customers, frankly, know the territories, and when something goes wrong, can get somebody out there on site to repair it quickly. That's a really important constituency for utilities to maintain. So that's really what we're trying to use the deal generation from the utilities to seed these markets of trade allies, and then eventually give them the opportunity to sell direct efficiency or AEP efficiency as a service, or whatever you have. But then, yeah, once we've selected a trade ally, I guess before we get to there, when we're selecting those trade allies, again, one of the things I talked about was being able to make sure that the customer is getting a good deal. So, you as the utility, or the utility as a customer of Allumia, have access to a database of projects that have been built and bid in the past. And so we could say, hey, based on local labor rates and the equipment being installed, this is a great deal. Or this is a little bit expensive. And maybe if we recommend to the trade ally that they use some other piece of technology, we can bring that down into a rate that can be paid off more easily by the service contract. Or maybe we can go to the customer and say, hey, we'd like to do half of the work overnight and half of it swing shift, because that's going to let us work faster or cheaper. The utility and Allumia can sort of negotiate those pieces pretty easily, and we know what the levers are to pull both on the customer and the trade ally side to get that best work done. But then, yeah, sort of one of the things we've tried to do once you've selected that trade ally to move the work forward is to boil the process of installation, and really it starts during sales, but sales through installation, down to a set of milestones, sort of 20 to 30 milestones that are the same for every single project, so that again, without having to put feet on site, that every project will have gone through the same steps. It will have the same documentation. It will have the same quality assurance steps. The meter will be installed in the same way at the same time at the beginning of every installation, so you can observe energy efficiency savings taking place as more and more equipment gets installed. That you know that before you set foot on site with a contractor, you have a letter of authorization signed by the customer, and that documentation has been submitted to the permitting authorities, and that when a contract is complete, you've always got COIs on file. And it's just sort of standardizing and automating that process in a way that takes the capacity for human error out of it. And then similarly, in trying to eliminate human error, there's sort of that IoT element where we are providing revenue grade metering that gets installed at the device or at the circuit level, so we can observe in real time the savings that are taking place and what is driving those savings. So, like I said, you install that metering at the beginning of the project, and you can watch as more and more equipment gets installed. You can also come back to a customer and say, hey, you didn't save as much money as we thought you would this month, and that's because on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, your closing manager has been leaving the lights on overnight. And you really might want to have a conversation with them about that. And the customer can come back to us and say, hey, actually, we started restocking the shelves on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights. And so he's actually supposed to leave those lights on. It's a real experience that happened with us. But those are sort of the things that providing really granular detailed, accurate metering can provide you those insights. And that's really what we're putting together from the technology front. We pair that up with the financing where we can bring in the capital to fund these projects, get paid back out of the savings. And it does really start to shape up into something that is very easy for an end customer to opt into and very easy for a utility to take advantage of, right? It is a prepackaged solution that they put their name, their branding on, they go sell it into the market, and the tools are all there to run. From customer identification through sales, documentation, project management, and long-term service. And, we've also got a program staff that's there to, help people every step of the way, because just like our efficiency as a service contracts, when we're providing our platform, we get paid on a success basis. So we're out there to make sure that every program that we build is driving as much revenue for our customers as possible, because that's how we get paid.
Totally. All right, Aaron, let's close with Carveouts, a podcast, book, TV show, movie that you'd recommend people check out. It could be related to all this, or it could be totally unrelated to all this, just something you recommend people check out.
Oh, man, I obviously recommend that everybody listen to the Nexus podcast, but they already are listening. So you should also listen to the Planet Money podcast. Always an interesting set of information that you could pick up from that. For books, I always recommend that people, not an energy book, but read 100 Years of Solitude.
Okay.
That's a classic. But if you want an energy book, I think The Age of Edison, about the first utilities, which started out as lighting as a service company, where you paid by the bulb, by the month for electric light, is a very interesting read.
Okay. Do they take it up to present day, how that evolved into what we have today?
They don't get as far as the present day.
Okay.
But they do. It starts with the Pearl Street generating station, goes through the very deregulated early days of utilities, where you would have dozens of electric generators in any one city, and everybody would be stringing their lines on the same poles, and it was not uncommon to have multiple deaths of linemen per week, because there's just this rat's nest of uninsulated wires dangling above the city.
God.
To arc lights, where in some cities, sort of the first public electric lighting was not incandescent bulbs or anything, but these massive arc lamps that they would put up on towers that would illuminate the entire city with this 6,000 Kelvin lighting. Super interesting. Definitely worth a read.
Awesome. Well, we will put those in the show notes as usual, and I'll probably be ordering at least that one.
It's a quick read. It's a quick read.
Cool. Well, Aaron, thanks so much for coming on the show. This has been exactly what I hoped it'd be, for clarifying complexity, removing complexity. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening to me ramble and what was hopefully not too complex a monologue or dialogue.
All right, friends, thanks for listening to this episode of the Nexus Podcast. For more episodes like this and to get the weekly Nexus newsletter, which, by the way, readers have said is the best way to stay up to date on the future of the smart buildings industry, please subscribe at nexuslabs.online. You can find the show notes for this conversation there as well. Have a great day.